Everyone. Today we're going to continue our discussion of preparation for Moshiach. Just to recap and expand a little on what we discussed last week. Preparation for Moshiach, preparation for the final redemption, has been going on since the beginning of time. All of history has prepared us for the Messianic age, especially Jewish history, both in a positive and in a negative way. The positive, the cumulative effect of the mitzvahs that we have performed throughout the thick and thin of our existence, has created an explosion of spiritual and godly energy that is unimaginable. Because it's so unimaginable, we can't see it. Because if we see it, we wouldn't have free choice anymore. We would be overwhelmed by the positivity and the divinity of our existence to the point that we would be incapable of ever doing anything wrong. And God wanted us, at least for the duration of the exile, to have absolute free choice. But every mitzvah, as I explained last week, is comparable to all of the nuclear weapons detonated all at once. And not only would it be totally destructive, God forbid, if ever that thing would it would destroy the whole earth, but the radiation would continue on for thousands of, perhaps millions of years. Well, in a spiritual sense, everything that exists in the world of evil exists in the world of goodness in a positive way. Every mitzvah that we do creates an explosion of divine energy, and in the aggregate, it has such a power that even after we did those mitzvahs, the fumes, the spiritual positive fumes, linger on forever. And that is what prepares the world for the Messianic age. But then it's also true that the negatives prepared us for the Messianic age. The negatives I'm referring to is the suffering of the Jewish people in their pursuit of being Jewish. That every time a Jew went through suffering and persecution and oppression, it refined the world and prepared the world for the ultimate redemption. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we should celebrate suffering and pain. We get rid of suffering and pain. But whatever the suffering and pain that we already had has a positive impact on preparing the world for the Messianic age. Even the Holocaust, which has no explanation that any human being can give to explain why it happened. Why did God allow it to happen? But one thing we do know, that the only way that God could make up for the Holocaust is to bring us something that is so powerful in a positive way that it will put the Holocaust in perspective or diminish its impact as if it never happened. And that is something we can't even imagine. That's the Messianic age. The Messianic age will be so powerful in a positive way that it will render the negatives of the past as if they didn't exist. We can't do that. We can just give a little bit of an analogy. If a person goes through hardship, endures sickness, or whatever hardship there may be, and as a result, they win $10 million and they become very wealthy, they'll be able to put the hardship in perspective in their own mind and say, yeah, it was worth it. We can't fathom how that can be said about anything as the Holocaust, even lesser tragedies. But God could imagine that. He could create something, an environment in which all of the suffering of the past will be reversed. And something that we can't even understand today. That's why we need the Messianic age, for that to become a reality We also explained that there are specific commandments, specific mitzvot, that are designed to bring the redemption closer, such as giving tzedakah, such as lighting a Shabbos candle, and so on and so forth. And the last thing that we spoke about was the person who shows a desire for redemption, who craves, who yearns for Mashiach, that too helps to bring about the final redemption in the Messianic age. And this is based on many different sources. First of all, biblical sources. The book of Habakkuk, one of the prophets, the minor prophets as he's called. He wasn't minor because he was minor. It's a small book, so the smaller books are called minor prophets. And in that book, he speaks about that even if he tarries, even if he delays, Mashiach he's referring to, ach chakelo, wait for him. If someone is supposed to come to your house to do something that you need, that is important, and they make up a time, and the time has come and the person you're waiting for doesn't arrive, so what do? Do you say, well, he's probably not coming or she's not coming? No, if it's a reliable person, you say, I'm going to still wait because I know it's going to happen. I don't understand why they're late. Maybe there was some type of delay that I don't know, but we'll find out eventually. But they're certainly going to come. So that's essentially a biblical imperative that even when Mashiach delays, you're supposed to wait. Waiting means that you're supposed to expect it. And moreover, you're supposed to yearn for it and anticipate it and want it to happen. That's the biblical source. And that's probably the basis of the phrase that we say in the Ani Mamin, the 13 principles of faith that are enunciated by many Jews every day. They refer to the 13 things that a Jew has to believe in. And number 12 is, I believe in the coming of Mashiach with perfect faith. And then it adds, and if he tarries, it means if he delays, I still will wait for him every day. We never give up waiting, no matter how much it seems that he has delayed way beyond what we could have imagined. So that's the biblical source. The Talmudic source is one where the Talmud discusses what are the questions that we're going to be asked when our souls leave our bodies and we come before the heavenly tribunal. So we're going to be asked a few very, very pointed questions. One of those questions is Tzipita Liyeshua. Did you yearn or anticipate the salvation? Did you just sit back and say, well, God, whenever you bring Mashiach, I'll show up, I'll do you a favor? Or do we say, I want it to happen? We want Mashiach. We want redemption. You show that you yearn for it, you are waiting for it and expecting it. Then you will be able to have a good response in the future. So that's one Talmudic source. And Maimonides makes it even more clear. Maimonides says that anybody who doesn't believe in Mashiach, or anyone who doesn't wait for Mashiach, has denied the Torah. Why is waiting for Mashiach, or not waiting, considered to be a rejection of the Torah? So one very prominent rabbi, the chief rabbi of Israel, mentioned this explanation, that if you really believe in something that is so good, so phenomenally positive, how could you not want it and wait for it and yearn for it? If someone that you know, a loved one who has been separated from you for decades, and they're supposed to come to visit, and you don't show that you're anticipating it, what does that mean? Either it means you have no heart, you have no emotions, you're not normal, or it means you don't believe they're coming. If you don't believe someone is coming, you're not going to yearn for it. It's not going to happen. Why should I yearn for it? Why should I experience a disappointment? So the person is not only obligated to believe that there is such a thing as the Mashiach, they have to express that belief by yearning for it. And then we have our daily prayers. The most central prayer of Judaism is called the Shmona Esrei, the 18 blessings, or the Amidah, the standing blessing. We say that 3 times every day. So in the weekdays, we ask for all of our needs. Shabbat, we don't ask for our needs. But on the weekdays, we ask for all of our needs, and one of the needs is for Mashiach, redemption. So in that prayer, there's a phrase that says, we hope for your salvation every day. That every day we're hoping, the day doesn't go by when we're not hoping and yearning and anticipating the final redemption. I have a little story over here. There's a city in, right now it's probably, is it Belarus or is it Lithuania? I'm not sure. The borders always change. But there's a famous town called Brisk. I think the real name of the town is Brest-Litovsk, something like that.
Brest-Litovsky.
Okay, where is it? Which country is it in now?
Border Poland and Belarus.
Okay, it's on the border. Everything's on the border of Europe. Right. So, the city of Brisk was famous for the great luminaries that it had as rabbis. The most famous of them was Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, who was the grandfather of the American sage, Rabbi J.B. Soloveitchik. But his father was known as the Beis Halevi. That's the name of the book that he wrote, and very illustrious sage and a candidate to be the rabbi of Brisk. And he didn't want to be. They asked him, they appealed to him that he should be the rabbi, and he said, no, no. And someone told him that they sent messengers to inform him that 25,000 Jews were anxiously awaiting his arrival at the train station in Brisk. So he said, if 25,000 people are waiting for me, I can't say no. That's the story. When they told this story to the Chafetz Chaim, he was another Lithuanian sage of the 19th and 20th centuries. He said, and I quote over here, if the Beis Halevi, Rabbi Soloveitchik, couldn't refuse 25,000 Jews eagerly anticipating his arrival, surely Mashiach can't do so either. His delay in coming can only be due to the fact that we've grown so accustomed to our comfortable lives in exile that we don't feel lacking and aren't yearning for the final redemption. But if God would see that 15 million Jews are waiting at the train station and saying, where's Mashiach? Then that certainly would accelerate his coming and make him come sooner than could happen if, God forbid, we don't show that eager anticipation. There's a song that was composed by children, I guess, in camps. It became a very famous Chabad melody. We want Mashiach now, and we don't want to wait. So that essentially encapsulates everything that I've said until now. Okay, so we have to anticipate, and that's what I want to focus on. We have to anticipate and prepare for the coming of Mashiach. But why? We stated a fact, that's the reality, that's what is important. But why? So the truth is that one could divide our preparation or our yearning for Mashiach, for redemption, into 2 categories. And today I'll focus on category number 1. But what are the 2 categories? Let's go back to the first liberation, the first redemption. The Jews who were slaves in Egypt, 210 years, tortured. People don't even realize the extent to which the Jews suffered in Egypt. People think it was slavery, which is bad enough. It wasn't just slavery. It wasn't just back-breaking, torturous slave labor. It was actually mass murder as well. Because, and that's one of the reasons, we eat charoses on Passover, the mixture of the apples and the nuts and so on, and we put a little wine in it to make it red. What is the thing behind that? It's to remind us of the mortar that we had to make in Egypt. But if we didn't fulfill our quota, they would take babies and crush them with the mortar, and their blood would color the bricks, the color of blood. And that's why, to remind ourselves of that type of torture and persecution, we eat the charosis, we eat that mixture, which reminds us of the mortar, and the wine reminds us of the blood that was shed in order to make those bricks. So it was actually mass murder. Another midrash tells us that Pharaoh developed a skin disease, a leprosy, or whatever it was, and the doctors suggested that he bathe in blood of Jewish children that were slaughtered for him to treat his leprosy. So this was the most horrible type of persecution, and it lasted for 210 years. Although it started in a mild way, the last close to 100 years were actual barbaric torture and persecution. So does it surprise anyone that the Jews would want to leave Egypt? Of course they would want to leave Egypt. They would want to get away, run away from the most horrible, the most horrific type of persecution. So that's one reason why you would want to leave exile, because exile is terrible. But there's another reason. You want to march towards the land of Israel. You want to march towards Mount Sinai first, and then pick up the Torah on your way to the land of Israel and start a national existence based on the teachings of Torah to make the country a holy place, and to bring that holiness not only to Israel but to spread it to the whole world, and ultimately to bring about the final redemption, the Messianic age. So there are two reasons why you would want to get out of Egypt. Either you're running away from the horrors of Egypt, from exile, or you're running towards a goal. If you see someone running, you have to ask them, what are you doing? Why are you running? So either they're not happy where they were before and they have to run away from where they were, or they're trying to get to some place, a good place, and they're running towards that. So when the Jews left Egypt, what was their main preoccupation? They weren't thinking that much about Sinai. They were not thinking that much about Israel, about settling in their own land. They were thinking about, let's get out of this hardship. Let's get out of this persecution. And there's a midrash, actually the Talmud, that makes this point when God says to Moses, I want you to get the Jews, before they leave Egypt, to borrow the wealth of Egypt and take wealth with them. Why? Because I promised Abraham that the Jewish people, his descendants, will be slaves, but they'll leave Egypt with great wealth. So I want you to make sure that they take the wealth with them. Well, why wouldn't they take the wealth? And the answer is, if someone is in prison, in a terrible dungeon, and he's told, if you stay another day, you'll get a lot of wealth, the person would say, get me out of this torture. I don't want to even endure one more day of that torture. So the people were likely to say to Moses, why should we waste our time taking the wealth of Egypt? Let's get out already. So God says, please, I want you to convince them to take the wealth. It's hard for us to imagine that you have to convince people to take wealth. But that was the situation then. They were focused on escaping Egypt. Because being in exile, and this is true about every exile, and it's especially true about this exile we're in right now, exile is toxic, physically and spiritually. Physically, just have to go back a few decades, and you see how terrible exile was physically for the Jewish people. The Holocaust, the pogroms, the way the communists tortured Jews, harmed Jews physically, and throughout all of our history, there is not one period we can talk about in which there was no persecution somewhere in the Jewish community. So exile is toxic physically, but it's even more toxic spiritually. What happens in exile is that we lose control of our destiny. We are under the control of other forces that shape the way we think and shape the way we act. We can't afford to stay in exile. You know, when the Torah describes the Jews leaving Egypt, it says, Ki barach ha'am, the nation fled. So the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, in his classic work, the Tanya, asks a very simple question. Why did they have to flee? Pharaoh was now more than happy to let them go. His heart was hardened later on. But at this point, after the plague of the firstborn, where every firstborn in every Egyptian household died, Pharaoh was pleading with them, please get out. So if the Jews said, well, we're not in a rush, we'll get out tomorrow, he would have had no choice. So why did they have to flee? And the answer is because if they stayed another day in Egypt, they would have been lost to Judaism. They would have been lost to the Jewish people because exile is so toxic, they had their fill. There's a certain point of toxicity that if you get any more of it, you're dead. They could not have managed one more day in exile. So that's the thrust of getting out of exile, because exile is a situation that is intolerable. The same phenomenon we have with the concept of teshuvah, which is translated usually as repentance. But teshuvah really means return. Let's say you know someone who's into drugs, into all sorts of immoral activity, the gangs, and they come to a point where they hit rock bottom, and then they begin to rehabilitate. What causes them to change? Because they realize how horrible the situation they were in is. They're just running away from the most toxic, the most threatening environment. That's what tshuva is on one level. It's where you're running away from the fact that you realize one day you wake up in the morning and they said, what did I do with my life? I wasted my life. My life was not a life that God would be happy with. I was really in the dumps, spiritually speaking, and I have to get out of this. And that motivates you more than anything else to get closer to God and to God's teachings. So that's the aspect of running away from exile. And it's a very powerful force. When you realize how bad things are, it motivates people to do something that takes them in the other direction. But the focus is not on the goal, the focus is on running away. If you see a grizzly bear and you're in Yellowstone National Park, what is your instinct? To run away. Although the grizzly bear could probably run a little faster than any of us. But you see a threatening force, you want to run away. You're not thinking about where you're going to go. You don't care if you're going to go into a cabin or jump in the lake, as long as you're out of reach of that grizzly bear. But there's a drawback with this approach. It's necessary, but there's a drawback. Number one, when you focus and dwell on the negativity, sometimes that itself creates a negative force within you. You know, there are people who are disciplinarians, who love to tell people what they're doing wrong, and they love to criticize. And it's a good thing, you could say, well, I'm trying to help the person rehabilitate, I'm trying to help them. But if your whole focus is negative, you become a negative person. Even though Judaism recognizes the need sometimes to rebuke someone. If you see someone doing something wrong, then there's a commandment in the Torah, you're supposed to rebuke them. But if that's your whole focus, and you're preoccupied with the negative, you become negative as well. Because your whole approach is one of negativity. You can accomplish much more with positive reinforcement to help change people than with negative. And if you have to use the negative approach, the discipline approach, you have to minimize it. Because being negative can sometimes foster more negativity. So if we think, I want to get out of exile because exile is terrible, it's horrible, and you're focused only on how bad things are, then that takes away the light from you. You're focused on the darkness, even if it means fighting the darkness. There's an interesting, it's a cute little, it's not said as seriously, but it's an interesting commentary. When Rebecca, the matriarch, was pregnant with Jacob and Esau, Yaakov and Esau, she didn't know what was going on because the children were wrestling inside of her. There was a lot of commotion there. And then she went to a prophet and she was told that there's going to be two nations and they're going to be fighting. But why were the kids so active in the womb? So according to the Midrash, when Rivka passed a house of idol worship, Esav was trying to get out and to be born so he can go into the idol worshiping center. When Rivka passed the Jewish Discovery Center, Yaakov was trying to be born because he wanted to come to the class, and he couldn't hear very well through the womb. So the question is, and that's why she felt she's getting labor pains and schizophrenic labor pains. Either the kid is interested in idol worship or is interested in serving God, serving one God. Okay, that's the Midrash. But then someone asked, how could it be that Esav, he isn't even born yet, he should already harbor desires to worship idols? It's a little hard to understand that. And the answer is that no, Esav was not trying to worship idols. He was trying to throw rocks at the idols. He was trying to fight the idol worship. But that was already a bad sign, because if your whole focus is fighting, even if it's fighting evil, and you don't have as strongly or even more strongly the desire to cultivate positive energy, because he didn't try to come out when they were passing a house of worship of one God, that's a bad sign. If your whole focus is just being negative. You know, there were groups within the Jewish community, starting in the 19th century, that were threatened by the intrusion of secular, humanistic influences. So they became very militant in opposing anything and everything secular. And this group, I'm not going to go mention any names, but this group experienced a lot of kids dropping out because you can't cultivate continuity. People should love Judaism when your whole approach is negative. Even though it was justified, their negativity was justified, but you can't just focus on the negative. It's not enough to run away from exile because it's so horrible. You have to develop, and we'll talk more about this in the next class, you have to develop a positive attitude towards the goal, the objective, not just running away from something that is negative. But in addition to that, there are 4 different distractions that could happen when you focus on the negative and running away from exile. Yes?
On a similar note to what you're saying, a temple once asked me a couple of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, to speak about anti-Semitism to a 6th grade group in Sunday school, and on the same note, focusing on the negative. I mean, it's important for kids to know about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, but to learn about anti-Semitism before you learn about the beauty of Judaism and what you love about Judaism and why you're proud to be a Jew, could also be counterproductive.
Right. Sometimes, right, in education, you don't want to expose children to what is negative about the Jewish people's existence and think, well, that's going to make them feel part of the Jewish people because we all suffered. On the contrary, that actually causes kids to be turned off to Judaism. The whole focus on the Holocaust in Jewish education amongst children, it's not that knowing about the Holocaust is bad. That's something that's necessary. There's a commandment in the Torah. We should always remember what Amalek, the biblical Amalek, but likewise the contemporary Amalek, evil nation, did to the Jewish people. But it can't come first, and it can't be the overarching source of Jewish education. I think that's a very good point. Now, what happens if you are running away from a barking dog that's trying to bite you? So you run from it. But what happens if while you're running away, you see a grizzly bear coming at you from the other direction? So you run back to the dog. Because the second crisis is worse than the first. Whenever you're running away from something negative, when you find something more negative, you'll run back to the negative, the lesser of two evils. Yes?
What percentage Jewish people leave Egypt?
What percent?
Yes, approximately. Everybody leave?
No. According to the Midrash, but that's for another time. According to the Midrash, only 1/5 left.
1/5 left.
Right, 1 of 5. The rest died out in the plague of darkness. But that's another subject for another time. So, if you're, in other words, they were happy to stay in Egypt. They didn't want to run away. But when you're running away from one crisis, another crisis might be worse, and you'll run back. Then another problem could be if you're focused on the negative, you'll always find people who say, I'm going to fight. Instead of running away from it, let's confront it, let's fight with it. And then what do you gain? You're never going to get to your destination. Then there are those who have the defeatist approach, and they surrender. They say, we're never going to escape. They'll catch us. They'll destroy us. So let's go back. And then there are those very pious people who'll say, I'm going to sit and pray. Instead of forging onward to the goal, they'll say, let's pray. Now, I'm all for prayer. Some of my best friends pray. Nothing wrong with prayer. But actually, these were 4 groups of people who had 4 reactions to the exodus from Egypt because they focused on the negative. What are the 4 groups of people? When they came to the sea, the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds, and the Egyptians are pursuing them, the water is in front of them, they were surrounded. So 4 groups of Jews emerged. One group said, let's go back to Egypt. Let's surrender. They're going to kill us if we don't. Let's go back to Egypt. Another group said, let's fight. Let's fight them. Let no one say that Jews are passive and they go to their slaughter like sheep, which is what we were accused of until the state of Israel. And then Jews are so violent and so militaristic, or we go to our deaths like sheep. Depends on which anti-Semite you're talking to. So some Jews said, let's fight. A third group said, let's commit suicide. Let's just jump into the sea and drown ourselves. And the fourth group said, let's pray. Why did they come up with these 4? Because they weren't focused on the goal. And God says to Moses, this is a multiple question test. Which one is the right answer of these 4? Return to Egypt, fight them, commit suicide, or pray? And the answer is none of the above. They were all wrong. Why were they wrong? Because they were just focused on getting away from the danger of exile. That was their focus. So when you're running away from exile and you think that there's a bigger threat, if you keep on running, you'll go back, or you'll try to fight, or you'll try to commit suicide, or you'll start praying. And God says, maybe those are right things under different circumstances. Sometimes you have to fight. Sometimes you have to surrender. Sometimes you have to pray. I don't know if you ever have to commit suicide. Actually, there is such a precedent in Jewish history when the Crusades were coming into different towns in Germany, the Rhineland, and if they caught Jews, they would threaten Jews with death unless they convert to Christianity. And many of the Jews committed suicide to not be forced into embracing another religion. And that was their, well, also Masada is an example, but Masada is controversial. But let's not go into that. But certainly, these are four approaches that may have some justification under different circumstances, but not when you have a goal. The goal was what? Go to Mount Sinai. Go towards the land of Israel. That's our goal. When you're focused on the goal, you don't get sidetracked by other things. But when you're focused only on running away from something, you get sidetracked. For most of our history, unfortunately, the focus of wanting Moshiach, wanting redemption, was to get out of exile. And we can't criticize them for that because exile was really horrible. We can't even imagine. No child born today can't imagine what life was like in Europe 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago in different parts of the world. Jews were always persecuted and oppressed. They're born in a world that they could never, none of our forebears could have imagined could possibly exist short of the coming of Mashiach. So for most of the history, the focus was escaping exile. But now, since we're living in a almost perfect world relative to the way things used to be, and I mentioned this in the last class, this is the first time in history since the biblical days of King Solomon, where Jews are free to be Jews wherever they live in any part of the world. Even in Arab countries, even Iran, Jews are free to practice Judaism. There are no restrictions on Jewish practice in any place in the world where Jews presently live. And some of this is as recent as the last 30 years, since 1990, the collapse of the Soviet Union. That was the last bastion of Jewish persecution because of Judaism. So you're talking about 30 years. Has changed the whole landscape of the Jewish people's freedom to be Jews. And we're living in a modern age where we have every technological convenience. We have the cures to so many illnesses. We have so much technology we could connect to any person, any place in the world. We could connect all of people together. You could be on one WhatsApp and you could have who knows how many people conversing together. These are all incredible things. You can have access to all the knowledge of Torah. On my computer, I have a hard drive. It fits in my pocket, 150,000 Jewish books. With a search, you can find anything you want. No rabbi in Jewish history had more than a few thousand books in his library if he was very wealthy. And most of the rabbis had a few dozen books in their library. And now we can have access to everything. We're living in the most perfect times with all of the negatives that still exist. Now we have to focus not on running away from exile as much as running towards the goal, towards the destination. All of these positive things, what are they? Why is God making life so good for us? So many positive things are happening in our world. I know if you read the media, you listen to the media, everything is negative. And there are many negative things, but the positives far outweigh the negative. So why is this all happening now? Because God is trying to whet our appetite. He's giving us a taste of the future, just a taste, a little taste. There's a law that says that before Shabbat, you're supposed to taste the food that you're going to eat on Shabbat. Why do you have to eat some of the food? Well, the simple reason is if it needs more salt or pepper, you can always do that before Shabbat. But the main reason is it should whet your appetite and look forward to the Shabbat. Shabbat is a day you're supposed to enjoy. You're supposed to really derive pleasure from that day. But if the food is not tasted before, you don't have that much of an eagerness because you don't know what the food tastes like. So the same thing is true. Messianic age is the Shabbat of existence. Right now, we are right before the Shabbat, so God gives us a little taste of the future. He gives us a taste of what it means to be free. He gives us a taste of what it means to have access to all the knowledge that one could have never imagined 100 years ago, 50 years ago. This is all the objective of all the good things that we're having now. And if we want them to continue, we should realize why God is giving us all these good things. He wants us to develop an appetite for the future. He wants us to take that future and live that future today. So he's giving us the tools. He's making life so much easier for us. Again, I'm generalizing because there are individuals who have a miserable life, who are suffering terribly, and we should never forget those people. But we should also remember that anything that we have that is good is God's way of trying to get us to bring the future into the present. In the next class that we talk about the subject, we'll talk more about what is our goal, what are we running towards. But it is important that if something is not good about exile, that should motivate us to want to get out of exile. But the focus should mostly be on the future. And with that, I'll take some questions or comments.
During I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was a song that said to accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, and don't mess with Mr. In Between.
Okay, that's right. Accentuate the positive.
Right.
That's
eliminate the negative.
Right. Now, in the book of Psalms, it's interesting, in more than one place, King David says, Sur meira, keep away from evil, va'aseh tov, and do good. And there's a big debate. What exactly does he mean? So most understand that to mean, before you focus on doing good, first get away from the bad things. If you have bad habits, you do bad things, get rid of those, and then start doing good things. And others say no. When it says keep away from evil, it doesn't just mean keep away from evil. It means keep away from focusing on the evil and first do good. Because a little bit of light has much more power to dispel darkness than fighting the darkness. You could grope your way through darkness. People could do that and find the way out. If you're in a dark room and there's no illumination and you have to get out, you'll go around groping and you find, I found the exit. No, it happens to be a window. Then you keep on groping more. You find, a door, and it happens to be a closet. And you keep on groping, and you'll finally get out, but maybe in the way of getting out, you'll be injured. You'll trip on something. You'll bump into something. If someone just turns on the light, has a little match, you just turn on the match, strike the match, and you walk right out. You don't have to worry with the closet or the window. You go straight to the exit. So, yes, you have to fight evil, but accentuate the positive, kindling light. You have to run away from exile, no question about it, but focus on the future more than you're preoccupied with the past. Yes?
Do you remember a couple of classes ago you talked about how in Judaism everybody has some good in them? It might be buried, but everybody has some
Right.
good, and it just seems like this goes along with that positivity. Everybody has some good inside.
Right. If we didn't believe that, if we believe that people are inherently bad, then it would be very hard to be positive about the future. But if you believe that we are inherently good, and the bad is just a cover, a facade, then we know there's much more hope for the future. That's very true.
Rabbi, I have a question. This is Karen from San Diego.
Okay, yes.
I'm on the Zoom. I'm aware of this, the Moshiach, we want Moshiach now, and the very, very strong singing and dancing, and there are Jews out there that are very uncomfortable with that because they're not understanding. They might be secular Jews, Reform Jews, conservative Jews, whatever category you want to put them in. And for them to learn about Judaism first is something very important. And then to see something like that, the fervent singing of wanting Mashiach now, it kind of it disconcerted. I don't know what the correct word is, but I know it puts them kind of, because I have had friends, who know that I'm Chabad, and they have expressed to me that they don't like that.
Well, I think the same people who might not like that would be just as upset if they were dancing about Hanukkah, dancing near a menorah and celebrating Hanukkah outside with a lot of fanfare, a lot of joy, exuberance. There are some Jews who, because of not a fault of their own, because they never had a Jewish education, are embarrassed with the overt expression of anything Jewish, not just Moshiach. Moshiach is just one thing that they feel uncomfortable with. And the truth of the matter is that there are just as many who are inspired by this and inspired to look more into it, to want to learn what Mashiach is all about. If you go on the internet, the topic of Mashiach is one that attracts more people than many other topics, because people are curious to know. But the people who do the dancing should spend some time also explaining things. No one should have to come to see people dancing and not knowing why they're dancing. That's just another characteristic of exile. These people are essentially influenced by exile mentality, where they think that anything that is overtly Jewish is not proper. And on the contrary, this is a country, a free country, and people respect people who respect their own religion, their own teachings.
I do think that the Hanukkah, the comparison you're making, there are many non-observant Jews that do show up for the Hanukkah giant menorah. And they don't seem to have a problem with it, maybe because, there's a big thing with Christmas and Christmas trees. It seems like there's a change in that, because the people that are showing up
that's
are
right. That's exactly the point I wanted to make. That when the Chabad started putting up public menorahs, there was a tremendous amount of opposition by the organized Jewish community and the disorganized Jewish community. But today that's a hurdle that we passed over. The same thing will happen with Mashiach. The more people talk about it, when the Rebbe started pushing the idea of Mashiach, the Rebbe got a lot of opposition from observant Jews, from what the New York Times would call ultra-Orthodox Jews. Hasidic Jews were opposed to it. And you know what? They're not opposed to it anymore. They're talking about it very, very forcefully, vociferously. Things have to change gradually to get rid of that mentality, that galut mentality that affects everyone, including ultra-Orthodox. Everyone is breathing the same polluted air.
I think the key is education, because anything that's unknown makes us feel uncomfortable.
Right.
So I think that people, Mashiach hasn't come yet. It's something we don't know yet. We haven't experienced.
Right. When we started this series, I said there was once a car that had a sign on it, Mashiach is coming, and someone overheard two people talking about it and says, "Who is this? What's this Mashiach coming?" So it's probably a new movie that they're promoting. You need education. That is the key. And for decades, Jews were hiding their beliefs, thinking that people are going to laugh at them. But when you explain things to people, it becomes acceptable, and not only acceptable, but they join the chorus. And Mashiach is taking a little bit more time than Hanukkah. But people were opposed to Hanukkah also, the public display of Hanukkah. In fact, there was like a whole movement, you could say, amongst rabbis, non-Orthodox rabbis, to put down Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a minor holiday, they would say. They would try to dissuade people from making a big deal about Hanukkah and giving gifts because it resembles the non-Jewish holiday, and putting down Hanukkah for whatever reason. They may have had some good reasons why they did that, but it destroyed people's attachment to the holiday of Hanukkah. When the Rebbe started to promote putting up public menorahs all over the world, there are probably tens of thousands by now, it changed the whole atmosphere. But education is obviously the key.
People thought that Moshiach is a Christian.
Right, that's another thing. Many Jews get their education about what is Jewish by saying what is non-Jewish is something I obviously can't believe in. If the Christians believe in Mashiach, then we can't believe in it, is what many ignorant Jews would say. In fact, Mashiach is that every religion that has Mashiach got it from us. They took it from us and they adapted it to their own theological preferences.
So when Moshiach comes, it will affect everybody.
The question is, when Mashiach comes, will it affect everybody? Absolutely. The Mashiach is universal. The fact that it's channeled through the Jewish people is because everything has to be channeled through one form or another. We are the conduit for the energy of Mashiach, but it'll affect the whole world, which doesn't mean that everyone will become Jewish, but it means that the whole world will become an ideal world. The Rebbe once told someone who asked, well, does it mean that every Gentile is going to become Jewish? And the Rebbe says, no. Everything will become what it's capable of becoming. We'll realize its potential. Inanimate things will be fulfilling their potential, whatever that is. Plants will be plants the way they should be. Animals will be animals. People will be people. And Jews will be Jews, fully Jewish in the full sense of the word. But it doesn't mean that everything will be the same. There's some beauty in having differences. We don't want total uniformity. The one thing that will unite everyone is we will all recognize one God.
Well, one of the things that became universal that was years ago was just inherent in Judaism were bagels.
Right?
You
Very
know,
holy.
Now everybody eats bagels. You know,
Bagels and lox and
Bagels.
cream cheese, yeah.
right. You know, they know a good thing when they see it. In fact, there was a story I saw it on the television. The biggest bagel maker in New York City. He has a guy who was a black man. They make the bagels by hand, all of them. He makes thousands of them every day, and they roll up a roll that he takes it and flips it over, throws it in the water. So you don't have to be Jewish to make a bagel.
Made our influence.
No, but I think we're more interested in other things to influence the world other than bagels. Too many calories in bagels.
Talking about fighting, that sometimes when you fight negative forces, it preoccupies you. I find like with diets, when people are so preoccupied with their diets, counting every calorie and all that, it's such a preoccupation that an entire day they're thinking about food. So it makes actually the diet harder because their entire day they're preoccupied by it. But when you mentioned about escaping exile, I don't see escaping exile as a form of fighting. I see it as stopping cold turkey, as if someone is an addict and they have to, you can't go from 10 boxes of cigarettes to 9. It has to stop cold turkey to just run away from the addiction.
Yeah, you have to run away from the addiction,
Right,
but
so is escaping Egypt a form of fighting exile, or is it just
running away from
Running
something
away to go
negative
someplace.
is the same thing as fighting something. It's running away. You're not focusing on the goal. You're focusing on how bad things are now, not how good things will be in the future. You just want to get out. That you don't even care for the money. You just want to get out of there, and you're not focused on the future. And again, I'm not saying that running away from exile, wanting Mashiach because you want to run away from exile, is a bad thing. It's necessary when there's something negative going on in the world. you want to run away from it, but it shouldn't be the only focus, and it shouldn't be the main focus. We have to develop ourselves to develop a positive focus. Maybe I'll talk more about what I think COVID is all about, COVID-19, in relation to Moshiach. We'll do that next week. Keep you in suspense. Okay? Everyone have a good day, good week. God willing, next week I think we'll do another topic. We'll take a break from the Moshiach topic. It's this week is the yard site of Maimonides, the 20th day of the month. What day of the week will that be? 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, Friday. And next week is the yard site of the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe. So we'll devote our talk to Maimonides and the Alter Rebbe. And then we'll continue with the Mashiach topic the week after, God willing. Okay, everyone have a good week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
Have
you.
a good day, and everybody.